That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Hello, and welcome back to your favorite podcast at the intersection of faith and fear, where every week, and especially this year, we discuss what scares us in order to find what saves us. This is the fear of God. Speaking to you right now is one of your hosts, Nathan Rouse, and typically with me is fellow co-host Reed Lackey. And guys, he was here a minute ago, but seemed to be muttering something in Latin and then slinked away. And I actually took a year of Latin in high school, but it's been quite a while, so my translation would probably be faulty. It's probably something like, "You're awesome, Nathan," which is cool. In the meantime, allow me to welcome you listeners back into our big series for the year, What Scares Us / What Saves Us, a series defined by you. You've been submitting your stories of films and media that instilled or stoked a certain fearful imagining in you, and we have been covering those right here on the show. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we have got a very special guest joining the crew. He'll be journeying with us to the event horizon for data and analysis. He claims it's all in the name of science. But either way, friends and foggers, welcome back to the bridge. In space, no one can hear you. Steve Beckley, welcome to the show, brother.
Hello, Nathan.
Welcome
Hello, Reed.
back.
Happy to be here.
Reed's not here yet, Steve. I don't know what you're referring to. While he's gone, though, Steve, I got a question for you.
Yes.
You ready?
Sure.
Have you seen Ted Lasso?
Sorry. Haven't seen him.
No? You need to get on that. You need to get on that because, it's good stuff. It's good stuff. But you know what? Well, we're going to make this a standard runtime episode so that you can get started on Ted Lasso. But I'm getting ahead of myself, as I'm prone to do quite often. Here at The Fear of God, we explore. We don't explain, except for right now when I explain that you can listen to The Fear of God at your nearest podcast platform. You can watch The Fear of God on YouTube, and you can browse The Fear of God on the web at thefearofgodpodcast.com, where you will find Reed. Hey, buddy.
There he is.
E pluribus unum. Habeas corpus. Et tu, Brute. What?
Whoa. Yeah. Just going down the list. Reed,
Sure.
in the last 2 minutes, you just Googled famous Latin phrases.
I actually didn't, but those are the only ones that came to my mind. So I was like,
Yeah,
okay, yeah, sure.
all right. That works.
Yeah.
Reed, Beckley's here.
Hey, Steve, how's it going, man?
Hi,
It's good
Reed.
to see you.
Continuity
Glad you're back.
guru himself.
That's right.
Editor's note, last seen on the New Year's Eve episode featuring Invisible Man and a bunch of friends.
Indeed.
Riri, we've got a movie to get to, but before we do that, we've got a
do.
show to get to. But before we get that, we've got some business to get to. Do we have any business that you want
A little
to talk
bit of
about
business.
here?
I don't have abnormal or unusual business. It's all the usuals. join the Facebook group, join
It's your
the social
business
media
number
feeds.
2.
Check out our ongoing blog series Afterthoughts, which are releasing
Dude,
sometime the weekend after
Dave Courtney,
oh
broke
man,
it down.
see, here's the thing, man. Like, Dave brought the thunder because the man had
He brought the nothing, but the something.
Well, yeah, no, it was not
a lot.
nothing. It was a lot. But what was so great, if listeners have not gone to check that out, so and future contributors to Afterthoughts feel no compulsion to meet Dave's gauntlet that he had thrown, but
Beckley's sweating.
he's like, oh, man. But he delivered this just really thoughtful and expansive kind of unpacking of both the history of the book and just all of the different implications and ramifications, some of which we touched on in the episode, some of which we hadn't yet gotten to. But it's a lovely piece, and it's in 4 parts on the website. So by all means, go and check those out. It's really, really an impressive and really thoughtful and wonderful piece. Thank you, Dave, for that.
Indeed. So yes, check out the Afterthoughts business time. Come join the Facebook group. Lots of fun happens in the Facebook group. Conversations that end jokes that make it on air.
I'm glad that today's
Toronto.
episode content is not based on a book.
Yes, indeed, indeed.
Because I didn't read the book.
All right. Yeah. We didn't either. I mean, or play the game.
Read would have. But
Right.
I would have. You are
read the
absolutely-
screenplay?
He'd say he would have. But all right. So that's enough of the business.
All right.
Gentlemen, It's now time to go to the continent where Geralt of Rivia has misadventures and his other co-star characters, Yennefer of Venderberger and Cyrilla of Centra. Don't say "Hey Siri" to her, at least not these days. Your devices will reply. Our star and time-tossed trio of characters that I imagine will converge at some point, but I just don't know. This is my Henry Cavill Witcher voice. Yes, it's time to go to episode 3 and 4 of The Witcher.
Yennefer of Venderberg sounds like a Swedish chef character.
It does. It does. And you know what?
Cookie.
I was writing down her name and it auto-corrected to Jennifer, and it was like, of course, because
Of course it did.
like,
yes.
right, that's what it is.
This is the early
Jennifer of Vanderberger.
Yennefer of Venderberg. You put the cheeky in the little stewie. Yennefer.
I mean, that one feels like you just put syllables in a bag and pulled them out. Vanderberger.
Sure. Yeah, of course.
Would you like some cheese on your Vanderberg?
Oh my gosh.
All right,
All of our Polish constituency are like, "Duh, Nathan and Reed."
Yeah, we lost the one. Beckley. So we're getting to episodes 3 and 4 now. Had you did us the favor of kind of partnering in this material. Good on you. You're a good friend and media consumer. What was your familiarity with this series before these 4 episodes?
Pretty much zero, pretty much nothing. I knew it was on Netflix, but I knew it was based on a video game. But before I watched the first episode, I didn't know anything beyond that. I figured out a little later that the video game was based on a book from Poland.
Right.
I didn't know that before I started.
Do any of the 3 of us know, like,
Here he comes. No, we don't.
No,
we don't.
I just, it's like, why even ask, Nathan?
We don't know.
No, the thought that came to me was like, how many games are there? Does the TV series track the narrative of the games? Who knows? We need a Witcher expert. Yeah. I haven't either. It's just more fun. It's just more fun to be like, what is happening on this show? Did you know that, Steve, that the characters' stories were taking place in alternate timelines or in?
I figured that out when Reed said it last week.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and your first clue to that would be in episode 4,
right?
Like that's really the first time. If you had not known that by like extracurricular information, which is how I found it out, your first clue to that would be in episode 4 when Geralt shows up with characters we've already seen die
at
the banquet, and then they're all showing up, and the Queen Calanthe. Yeah. Okay. Of Centra.
I'm good this week.
You're like, all right,
I got him.
But yeah, that would be your first clue.
Yeah. Now well, that's helpful. So Reed, speak broadly. So these today we're talking about episode 3, Betrayer Moon, episode 4 of Banquets, Bastards, and Burials. And how do you feel knowing our experience last week about these 2 episodes? Did they change your mind at all? Did it elevate at all? Is it you kind of in neutral gear? What are your feelings?
So it's super funny that you should ask that, because episode 3 really energized me quite a bit, and most of it revolved around the things that they did with Geralt, which we can get into in some more specifics in just a little bit. But no, 3 and 4 in stark contrast to my somewhat stunned and confused and befuddled experience of episodes 1 and 2. 3 and 4 really have me. Like I'm kind of in on the show now, because first of all, it's a little bit more streamlined a little bit. I think the picking up the plot, specifically in episode 3, picking up the plot with Yennefer, so being able to sort of thread something through her, and being able to thread something through that is a direct continuation, because even the Geralt plot lines have been, okay, that was the monster that week, this is the monster this week, and then in episode 3 we get that again. I'll come back to that one, but I think
the Striga, the princess,
the Striga, yeah. But carrying a struggle. So carrying over what was happening with Yennefer's plotline, I think anchored me a bit more. And even though there's some elements of particularly the ending of her story, which, you know, that whole sequence of her transformation is really uncomfortable to sit through, but I think it has a really nice payoff. The stuff with Geralt and actually like fighting to uncover this mystery of the Striga, and then changing from just being a slaughter machine to actually trying to rescue this creature and save this creature, just really pivoted me around a little bit in a way that I think put me on board more for the show. That was also carried over into what they dealt with in episode 4, where all of the Geralt stuff in episode 4, I was super energized by, because again, we're seeing characters we've already seen before. They're coming back in different contexts. Some things are starting to solidify. So yeah, I'm in on it. It pivoted from curiosity and homework to I was actively engaged with the majority of 3 and 4 as plot lines, as episodes, as, you know, constructed hours of entertainment. I'm in on it.
Yeah, I think I liked 4. How do I say this? So 3 had, as you alluded to, the kind of key scene of Yennefer's transformation. The Yennefer story in 4 was the first time I really felt like, oh, this is cool. The portal chase.
The portal chase stuff was great.
Ant monster thing. Like,
yeah, Psycho
cool.
Jiminy Cricket. Yeah, no, it's absolutely like, yeah, it was really and gets us an opportunity to explore kind of like what she brings to bear in terms of her power structure and how she. I feel like the way you just said that makes me want to introduce 2 notes here, and because we still got 6 episodes left, but most of the rest I imagine will be some version of plot, and 4 episodes left.
Talking about
yes, we've got 4 episodes.
There's 8 total.
There's only 8. Yeah,
whatever. Yeah, I mean, you know, 6, 8, 10, Vandenberg. You know, whatever.
If it ain't the names that'll get you the math. So like,
yes, exactly. And you good segue, Reed. Thank you. Way to tee me up. So 2 sort of complaints I have about the series overall that have. One that has sort of ironed itself out, though still could have been a thing, but the second one that I still kind of quibble with. So one is, and Steve, this is maybe fresh for you too, so feel free to jump in. So I went today to read the Wikipedia page to kind of refresh myself, because, you know, listeners may know this, we record 2 episodes at a time, so I've watched 4 episodes of The Witcher, and so I was just trying to reframe, okay, what is happening in these episodes. And I would encourage anyone to go do that, because if you're following along the show, because something the show doesn't do in technical form is give any bearing for chronology, and the Wikipedia gives years, like you know, for our 2021, whatever theirs is, it's like 1200x, you know, 12 this, 12 that.
I was just noticing that. I'm looking at it right now. And
and I think what I'm trying to get to here is the amount of help that provided to orient myself in the narrative, that I think, I don't know, I think I wish the show had front loaded, because you can still do, okay, these are taking place across different timelines, but tell me that, because I feel like I spent so much time those first 2 episodes in utter confusion as to kind of what is happening and their relationships to each other, that knowing that would have really helped ground me in what I'm watching. Because ultimately it is very cool when you get to the banquet and Geralt encounters Calanthe, and clearly we're now in the past of Ciri, who is not yet born. Their intersection becomes clear in that episode, so that's pretty cool, even with something as silly as something called the Law of Surprise, whatever. But part of me really, in reading the Wikipedia, I was like, I wish they had just done this, because it would have unburdened some of that major confusion. Do either of you echo that or share that thought?
I totally agree. I would completely echo. Not to just like tramp all over your opportunity, Steve, but like, but I think
welcome
like
back, Steve.
even just like holding up the years beforehand might have helped with that. Now, to that end, if you as the viewer hadn't figured out by episode 4 that things are time jumping, episode 4 would have firmly solidified it for you. But I do think those first 3 would have been less work and less confusion to simply, identify, yes, this is the sort of the timetable that we're playing with. And I don't know, I go a bit back and forth on it because plenty of other outlets move around through time and play around through time, be they a movie, be they, a book, be they a TV series. But I think most of the time when a medium plays around in time, there is usually another element of its structure that is linear. For instance, Tarantino with Pulp Fiction, going back 20 years now at this point.
94.
25, 26 years. Yeah, almost 27.
Yeah.
So going back to Quentin Tarantino, yes, that story is told non-linearly and jumps around in time, but it does so to fulfill an emotional arc. And so one of the things that's difficult to ascertain at this point in the show, we're midway through the show, watched 4 episodes, and at this point, I do think that I can't quite grasp the emotional arc they're aiming for that would justify telling this story unbridled from time. So put in slightly simpler terms, maybe by the end of episode 8, I'll look back on the rest of the show and say, oh, cool, this is why they introduced this piece here and this piece here and this piece here. But moving through the episodes singularly, I don't quite have that cohesion yet of the emotional sort of grounding.
And I'm not even arguing that I wish they hadn't done the time jumping. I'm just saying I kind of wish I had known and understood that, because I'll join with you, not with the Pulp Fiction example, but to me, it's not about something else needs to be linear. It's about, I'm going to do it. Lost. Okay. Lost ends up time jumping, but 1, it's a very dramatic payoff when it happens. And 2, Lost more or less is rooted in a naturalistic setting that I understand. The problem doing it here is I don't understand anything. And now on top of that, meaning I just mean it's a fantastical world that the rules I'm trying to figure out that are being kind of shadowed from me. Oh, by the way, it's also unstructured time-wise. It's just a lot. It's a lot to kind of foist from an accessibility standpoint. And I would think, call me crazy, but I would think if you're trying to garner fresh fans to the property, accessibility is what you need and what you want. It's just and you can't hang it all on Cavill, who has some very broad, strong shoulders, but it's a lot of weight to carry for one man.
No, indeed. No, you need a calibration point. You need something to sort of, and that is the argument. I mentioned this in last week's conversation about it. That's the argument of, are you trying to appeal to the broadest base possible, or are you trying to get it right for the people who would buy in on this and say, wow, they really captured the spirit of it? And to be honest, I don't know at this point, because I have not read the books and have not played the video games. So I don't know.
You ain't fat. You're nothing.
Oh my gosh.
You're not a fan. You're not a fan. The joke I'm going for.
Got it. I'm like,
this ain't for you.
This is
this isn't for us.
Right.
No, it's true.
I'm trying to get the benefit of the doubt so far.
Exactly.
That's true.
What are some notes, Steve, that you would have from at least episodes 3 and 4 that they can be broad, they can be specific?
Well, truthfully, I haven't gotten all the way through episode 4 yet. I've gotten to the part where
unplug him, Reed. Unplug him.
I wasn't supposed to say that.
No, I am. You are always welcome here.
Yes, absolutely.
I kind of get the gist of it. I know where it's headed.
Yeah. I just love that you know, he had a great film about a year ago. It was a surprise hit. It had a lot of naysayers going into it based on his the CGI design of him. I'm glad to see Sonic the Hedgehog get some more screen time in episode 4 as Dooney the whatever he is. Like, what? Oh yeah, so let's get back to my number 2 here, which is
number 2.
Yep, y'all made the joke for me. Is everybody can do anything. I'm just really like, when I'm unstuck in time, and it's one thing for the Witcher, the titular character, to have some sort of undefined power set, which, you know, I guess is like a hand, like the Force. But kind of a lot of other characters can do random stuff too. I'm like, okay. And every type of critter and creature and monster populates this world. Okay. You know, I guess that's what's on the continent.
Here's the thing. I'm not so I'm in this weird place when I hear you say that, because I don't disagree with you, because I don't understand the rules of navigation. At the same time, that's kind of how magical fantasy works. There are creatures who can do X.
I hear
there
that.
Are creatures who can do Y. There are and the creatures are all populated, you know, in wide array. And so it's like, that's why I say sincerely that I'm kind of like, I'm kind of with that. And the reason I'm with it is because emotionally I'm having the same experience. I don't understand the structure around who can do what. That having been said, though, I can't really fault the show for that, except to say that they did not, you know, define that for me yet. And maybe that's something that I'm just meant to accept and roll with, or is it something that's going to be a little bit more constructed in the later parts of the show? That's the part that I don't know at this point. I could only speak to the fact that, at this point in time, I don't know who can do what, why they can do it, or how they got to be what they're.
Magic.
It's just magic.
I kind of like how you learn a little bit every episode. You don't, they don't give it to you all at once. And you're kind of like a fly on the wall in this universe. And
right.
I like the portals. Everyone loves a show with portals.
Portals.
You know what? They don't make any more shows with portals. I'm glad to see.
She's got a sling ring, only without.
There you go.
Right, that's it,
Mr. Doctor. No, and so it's clear. I'm being I don't mean to come off critical. I'm saying I'm kind of actually more on board after these two than I was the first two. Yeah. If these two things had some clearer definition, I think I'd really be bought in. Right now, the show, not you, Steve and Freed, are relying on my affection for Henry Cavill and my appreciation for seeing monsters doing the heavy lifting for you, which they kind of do. But some of those other things, it'd be like, okay, man, if you just sort of tweak this, you know, maybe, I don't know, whatever.
I gotta say, just to reiterate for myself, about 10 minutes into the Geralt plotline with the Striga in episode 3, I actively felt myself fully engaged and like, I want to find out what happens here. I'm bought in on the character. I like that. And that carried over into the Geralt plotline in The Banquet in episode 4. It's got a good blend of humor. There's some good sort of thrills to that. Like the whole moment you joked about Sonic the Hedgehog, which that's funny. But like the moment when Geralt like steps in and finally decides to save him, it's a really energizing moment. That's a moment where and then that whole fight, it becomes the big fray against, them against all the rest of the knights. And then, the husband to the queen joins into the fight and everything. And so it's like all of that was very energizing entertainment. And at a certain point, this may come off like a backhanded compliment. I don't intend it to be. At a certain point, I stopped caring about what I didn't understand, and I was enjoying what they were doing. And that was very specific to kind of these couple of episodes. And I had enough to anchor myself into what was happening in the scene to be actively entertained. And though I was still quite confused about the broader ramifications of things, at a certain point, I didn't care anymore because I enjoyed what they were giving me. Yeah.
And I do think The Banquet. So my big, I didn't share in your sort of investment or buy-in with the Striga plotline, though. I thought, I will never fault the show. It nails the monster stuff. Like, it looks great. The production design is great. The creature design is great. All of that's really strong. And the general, as you described, kind of boorish humor attached to just Geralt, the character, works. The things that turn the corner for me, even though, silly things like the Sonic bit and the Law of Surprise, which I just wish they'd come up with a better name, but I like the concept. I liked the convergence that happens there, and it's like, oh, okay, this is kind of cool. This totally, this does, even though it doesn't propel me to want to go sit and watch it, it recontextualizes those first couple episodes to get you there, and the sling ring with the ant monster. So yeah, that was all good.
Awesome. Before we kind of wind it down, Steve, did you have anything else to add, or are we good?
Well, I mentioned Doctor Strange, a trivial bit.
Yeah.
The character Stregobor, who's the mage in the town of Blaviken.
Do we ever?
That's right.
He's played by Lars Mikkelsen, the brother of Mads Mikkelsen.
What?
Doctor Strange. Yeah.
Yay! That's cool.
Whose film Another Round just won Best International Film.
Oh, yeah.
It did. It's a pretty good movie. I liked it.
Yeah, I didn't see that one.
I guess I didn't recognize Lars Mikkelsen right away because of his big beard in this show. But yeah.
Ah, nice.
I like old Mads.
Very well done.
That's been another foray into the continent of the land and world of The Witcher, where sling rings, ant monsters, and anthropomorphic hedgehogs all live in harmony or not in harmony, depending on the episode. Tune in next week for episodes 5 and 6, where more might be revealed, but there will definitely be monsters and probably naked people. Until then, this has been TV Guideposts.
Hooky dooky guidepost.
Throw you in the burger.
Oh man.
Reed, why don't you bring us into the
you ready to go to the
dock? Why don't you dock us here?
Yeah, to the outer reaches of space, infinite space and infinite terror. Well, I'm actually gonna pivot in just a second, because yes, we have another installment for our main content of this ongoing series of what scares us. And Beckley had reached out to us. I'm sorry, I call you Beckley. You're my friend Steve now at this point, but had reached out to us and had submitted, among a few options of things to choose from, one of the options on the table was the 1997 just absolutely extreme cosmic horror sci-fi thriller, Event Horizon. So in a moment, in a brief moment, I'm going to pivot over to you, Steve, to go ahead and sort of invite us into what your thoughts are on this and why this was one of your selections for what scares us. And actually, yeah, if you're prepared to speak to that, I'm going to go ahead and give you the floor to just sort of, why are we talking about this movie today? What's the point?
What is the point? Yeah. I gave you a lot of options in the message I sent. It wasn't just on Event Horizon or even space horror, but that was one of the things. Yeah, and I think I explained even the first time I was on the Donnie Darko episode that science fiction was one of the things that led me to the horror genre originally. It was one of my gateways in, and in particular, one of the subgenres that kind of resonates with me is the space science fiction that takes place on spacefaring craft and space stations or other planets. And of course, there has already been an episode on Alien, and then he did Alien Covenant. But all the entries in that series, I kind of enjoy. But yeah, one that really comes to mind when we talk about ones that I was watching in my youth is Event Horizon. And Event Horizon is from 1997, so I was, I believe, I was in my junior year of college at the time.
Oh wow!
I think I'm a couple of years older than you guys. I was a RA in a resident hall of freshmen, and I remember one night, Event Horizon did not too well in the theater, but it kind of had a lot more business when it came out on VHS.
Yes, it did.
So I guess remembering back, we went to a Blockbuster. So this was like kind of the heyday of the Blockbuster era, 97 or 98. So brought Event Horizon back to the dorm, dim the lights, and I remember us being pretty.
That sounds amazing.
Right?
Just saying that, like
that's right.
Go to the movie store, rent the VHS, come back to the dorm, lights out, scary, crazy, scary horror.
A group of guys, myself, a junior, and a couple of group of freshmen, and put it on. I think we were pretty speechless through it. We didn't really know what to expect since it wasn't a very big popular movie.
The old RA corrupting the freshmen with
like, no, Mom, it'll be fine. The RA is showing it to us. Yeah,
college
it's gonna
is
be
a
great.
place of mind expanding, education.
Yeah.
Wow. No, it's you mentioned just a second ago that like and I was thinking this when this was, and I full peek behind the curtain. One of the reasons that I zoned in on the fact that and kind of pitched like, hey, we should of the selections that you had provided, I really wanted to take the chance to talk about Event Horizon. One of it is I'm in the same boat you are about can't even quite articulate what I love about it, but I love deep space, spacecraft, cosmic horror type stuff. I love that, whether it is of the variety like this, where it's like interdimensional chaos, where it is like of the monster in the catacombs variety, like Alien, or where it's sometimes even a bit more cerebral and psychological, like the Sam Rockwell starring Moon, or something like that, which is, but anything that takes place like just in a sort of a spacecraft, they're out sort of on their own, and they have to navigate and survive whatever perils may await them. I get really energized by stories like that, again, for reasons I can't quite understand. And so
we've been itching to cover Sunshine for years. I
know. Yeah. No, I want to.
Let's do it.
I think I've affirmed every single time. I've been like, yes.
We'll just tack that on to the end of this.
Sunshine's good.
Yeah. There's a sequence in Sunshine that's very similar to Event Horizon, where they venture onto another craft and where it's all spooky and derelict.
That's right.
I mean, that's like a subgenre of space horror, is like derelict spacecraft exploration.
No, absolutely.
There's even episodes of certain sci-fi TV series where they do that. And I'm thinking there's an episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, where they explore like the twin space station of DS9, Impact Nor.
Yeah.
Man, you're speaking Reed's language.
man, dropping some Deep Space Nine knowledge. That's awesome.
And then the third episode of the first season of Star Trek Discovery, where they go onto the spacecraft that had a malfunction, or something went wrong with their spore drive. You remember that, Reed?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
This is why Beckley is the continuity guru.
Yeah. And that's what that led to the whole plot line with the tardigrades and all of that other kind of, oh man.
And then that's connected back to Event Horizon, because it shares one of the cast members.
That's exactly right. Jason Isaacs. That's right. Oh, my man. See, you are absolutely speaking my language right now. That's so awesome. So, Nathan, you go get a drink. But yeah, and so when I first saw, I gotta confess that when I first saw Event Horizon, because I also watched it like probably around either like early college days, or like depending on the time frame when it hit video release, it might have been like my senior year of high school or freshman year of college. But the first time I watched it, I can remember thinking, and this was the weirdest experience to have, but I can remember thinking, oh, that was okay, but it reminded me a lot of Hellraiser, and I like Hellraiser more. I can remember actually thinking that when I watched the movie, and then
I picture this like, think like Young Sheldon series featuring a lackey who's just, but it's, you're a bright individual to be sure, Reed, but it's just about your misadventures as a youth watching all of these horror movies and trying to plug in social settings, but referencing, Event Horizon, it's really effed up and dark, but it's no Hellraiser, and all of the peers are just like, whoa.
is that how I sounded?
No, I'm saying young lackey. That's not
lackey.
You right now. Okay. Like old lackey it's you. People can hear that one. I'm just conjuring young lackey.
I appreciate this
same
part
hat.
Of the conversation.
Same
so
hat.
Much.
Same
it's
hat.
So great. Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. Do go on. No, so No, but so because there's some, well, here's why that ties back into something that I did find interesting in my research for this episode is, I guess there was a little bit of consultation done with Clive Barker on some material for Event Horizon. So like the Hellraiser connection was a little bit more obvious than I thought it was. And so, but over time, a strange sort of affection has built in me for this movie that I'm still, and I feel like I'm saying this more and more. I said it on RoboCop. I said it on a couple of other things recently where it's just like there has been something in the last maybe 5 to 10 years that for a few of these horror films that I perhaps remembered either fondly or somewhat passively when I first saw them, my affection for what they're exploring has risen quite a bit to the degree that I would say like, yes, I even in this movie, and while I was watching it, I was like, there are places this is not a great movie, but dang, I love it. Like there are like shots, and even the opening credits shots seem so like first year grad student, you know, like of the thing. And so I'm like, oh geez, this is really like cheesy looking.
What version of the movie or what medium did you guys watch it on?
So I own the movie on DVD. So basically, that's the version.
Is it the new release?
No, not the recent one. Because did you get the recent one that Scream Factory put out?
That's the one on my shelf behind me there. Yeah.
I'm so curious. I'm so curious, like how that was compared to.
Hold it up, Steve. I want to see it. Can you read
right there? It's right there.
Well, the glare, you know, whatever. Come on, okay.
He's gonna grab.
There he goes. There you go. This is for all the.
I love this. I love this cover art. No, I love that cover art. And
that's the slipcase. This is the.
See that the classic cover is behind the slipcase. Yeah,
it's the Shout Factory.
You're more professional at this than we are.
Flip it.
Yeah, because they have the thing inside where it's the reversible cover.
Yep.
Where I love those editions for that reason. I've been eyeballing that edition for a while. Haven't purchased it yet. But now here's what was curious about that, because you talk about like editions and versions and stuff. So there was a long history around, and I'll try to make it as, you know, like in the minute and a half version, but there was a long history about the production because the production was scheduled, budgeted, underway, but then James Cameron's Titanic, which was also with Paramount, was going to be delayed. So what they did was they knew this is going to be the Cameron vehicle, so we're going to push Titanic out so Cameron can do his thing. And then what we're going to do is Event Horizon then needs to move up in the schedule. So they just like dropped into the man's lap. Okay, you need to have this movie ready for us, like 2 or 3 months ahead of what we said. And he's like, well, I've got to rush through a cut. I mean, we've got to fast
He's like, this
forward
Titanic, that's not going to be a thing. Nobody's going to go see that.
That might be a reason why the credits look cheap, is because they had to rush into a.
It's it's funny. Yes,
that's fair.
That's very astute. And so then. He released a cut that was like 2 hours and 10 minutes long and apparently obscenely violent, like incredibly. And this movie's already extremely violent, but apparently that whole sequence of like the transmission from the Event Horizon was even more graphic, even longer, even more extreme. And that like they even brought in, this sounds a bit twisted, but they even brought in actual real life amputees to try to ramp up the horror, that they even brought in like active members of the porn industry to make some of the sexual encounters seem a little bit more authentic, and that whole thing was expanded more, and that all made it into this big 2 hour and 10 minute cut. Well, audiences were having none of it, and that was like the first time that the studio execs had seen the same thing. It tested terribly, and the studio execs literally came to Paul W.S. Anderson and said, okay, now you got to cut 30 minutes of your movie. Tone down the violence, cut 30 minutes down. And so he had to gut it down to the 95 minutes that it is, which was too slim. And people have been clamoring ever since for what's that longer director's cut? Give us that version of this film, because we're so curious about it. Because in addition to all of the perhaps more extreme gore and stuff, it also had active scenes of character development and relationships and a little bit more substantiation to some of the sort of weird turns that the film takes in its third act. And what I found really interesting that the director has said, and unfortunately so much of this footage is just lost to time. He said it multiple times where he's like, listen, guys, we have scoured the globe. We cannot find this footage. A director's cut is not going to happen for this movie. But he said what ideally would be great is not the 2 hour and 10-minute cut, which is too long, too plotting, and probably too violent. But what would be great is if I could have a chance to add maybe 10 to 15 more minutes to the movie that we've got. And if we had, a nice like hour 45 or maybe even, hour 50, I would be able to substantiate the character stuff. And that might be the vision that we were really going for. And there is a part of me that like sort of grieves that we're never going to get to see that version of it, because I think there's tremendous amount of potential in this film that we've got. And so much of it does feel like it's rushed through, like it's chopped through. And I think one of the reasons why and this will be my last sort of statement, pivot to something else, but I think one of the reasons why it's gained the cult status that it has is because there are some really interesting things going on in it. And there's some really savvy production design. There's some decent performances. There's a lot of good about this film. And it does feel like it just isn't quite fully formed. And that if it had a chance for a bit more of that complete vision, that it might just be a runaway, icon in the genre. But that's just that, that's kind of
I'm like an hour and a half. Sign me up.
And yeah, Nathan, what was your
well, I'm about to drop my bona fides up in here.
Here it comes.
Because Beckley's like, I saw this when I rented it from Blockbuster. Reed's like, I rented this on VHS. Nathan's like, I saw it in the theater in 1997. Yeah. Who's the real horror fan?
You got a story?
There's not really a story other than just, I was like, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into?
Nothing to stop your The Mummy 1999 story, right?
Oh yeah, when I had my foot barfed on by another patron in front of me and didn't realize what had happened. I was in flip flops. Yeah, good story, Beckley. But this one I wanted to throw up.
It fits in with Event Horizon.
Yes, it does. No, but I do. I don't know. I've always just been game to watch movies and genre movies in particular. So I don't even remember why this one may have hit the radar, but I was not prepared for what it is, and do have a memory of getting to the end and be like, "Whoo, boy, that was a ride on the Lewis and Clark."
Oh my Lord,
man!
Did you guys hear the news that there might be a new TV series?
I did see that. Yeah,
with Adam Wingard of all people. Yeah, but they haven't released like any sort of details about production date, if it has fully been greenlit or something. They're just it's sort of in the development.
People are still speculating whether it's going to be like a sequel or a remake.
Yeah. Adam Wingard is like getting his niche in. I'm going to take sort of icon archived properties and try to reinvigorate them. Blair Witch, he's done, Godzilla versus Kong. So anyway, go ahead.
Let me ask y'all a question, and I want us to get to our That Ain't Right here in a minute, but kind of before we wade too far into the gateway. So y'all have talked about your affection for the space genre and nerded out on some STDS9. So these days in the real world, you've got your doofuses like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos privatizing the space race and ignoring, the easily answerable question of whether those funds should actually be spent to better the planet Earth. But, what are you going to do?
Why not both?
It's more fun to.
Why not both?
So I'm going to insert a really funny story here. I was walking with my 4-year-old today, and the planet Earth made me think of this. And she has the former babysitter that she doesn't get to see much. And she was lamenting to me out loud. She was like, I want to see her, this babysitter. And she said, where does she live? And I was like, oh, she doesn't know her cardinal directions, much less street names, really. And I was like, well, it's about 5 minutes away. And she's like, well, I know she's on the Earth, but where is her house? And I was like, yes, my child, she is on the Earth. But speaking of not the Earth, my question for you guys is, if Elon Musk or Mr. Amazon himself were to give you the Willy Wonka ticket to go to space, like, does that hold any appeal to you? Is that a thing? Really?
Oh man, yeah.
We've never actually had this conversation of like, would you go to space?
Man, like, well, so I don't know that I would have the constitution for it. Like I would get nauseous.
We know your
crap.
story of just driving to the airport.
Thanks for that. Why is vomit showing up so much in this conversation?
Have you seen the movie?
Fair question. Fair point. But no, like it gets, and it goes back to like my young days of loving science fiction and all of Ray Bradbury and all of this stuff. Like if it was, I don't think I'm the pioneer, and I mean at 40 years old, it's just not going to happen. But if there was an opportunity to be like, hey, we have this completely sustainable, safe opportunity for you to set foot on the moon, yes, I would. I mean, yeah, I am very much like into the space thing and the stars. And so what's interesting is, and not to pivot us into like a heavy, serious direction right away, but like
this is why we do this.
I am on board for the conversation, 100% on board for the conversation about environmental protection and making sure that our planet Earth, that we are safeguarders and caretakers of that space, and that we should be much more conscientious in taking care of that.
But that's it.
No.
I burned it all down to go to space.
No. But my point being is like that is not in conflict.
Sure.
With the reality that I also believe in the expansive universe which our creators laid out for us, and so like I'm tremendously invigorated. You remember I don't know how many people read it. The film probably got more seen. The Matt Damon starring film,
Martian,
directed by Ridley Scott, The Martian. But I can remember I read that book, and if you have not read the book, please, even if you've seen the movie, you've got to read the book, because Andy Weir's like prose and all of the science that's in it, but yet is somehow just relentlessly entertaining in terms of how he figured it all out. It was incredibly energizing, and the prospects and possibilities about what's beyond the stars. I mean, I don't necessarily sit lockstep with this idea, but Bradbury had said that's how we live forever. Is we expand our exploration out into the wide frontier. Sure. And of course, loving Star Trek the way that I do, and the utopian sort of vision of the future and the possibilities that are out there, and the prospects and possibilities of life out there, and the prospects and possibilities of just exploratory, what we could learn from other planets and things like that. So if the question is just like, yeah, would I love to safely and
very cool.
Yeah, if I would love to safely step foot on Mars, yes, I would love to safely step foot on Mars. But I've no illusion that that's ever going to happen in my lifetime.
But that's what's a fun. It's a fun exercise.
But yeah,
Beckley,
I would. Yeah,
what about you?
The key word there was safe. I mean, it's not. I don't think it's safe now. Have you seen that Netflix documentary on the Challenger?
No.
Oh.
I have not watched it because I remember when that tragedy happened, and so I haven't made it to it yet.
It's like a 4-episode show, Challenger, the final flight, and showing how we're not quite there with guaranteed safety yet. So I don't think I would risk my life on going to space. But if they do make it a safe prospect, I have as much wonder as you sound like you have, and it'd be great to see the Earth from space, and that puts so much more. I hear that puts so much more realization into your mind on how small we really are, and how precious the Earth is. So that
absolutely.
First-hand experience would be really amazing.
I'm really proud of my question because it's fun.
Well, what's your answer to it? What's your answer?
I don't know. I mean, like y'all's vigor has kind of emboldened me. I will join y'all's crew.
Oh, sure.
Because my impulse would have been like, I don't know about that. Just I don't know, just like my feet on the ground kind of guy. But I can get on board the Wonder Train.
Sure.
Rocket pack or whatever mechanism we're taking.
So I'm gonna say one more thing before we pivot back into the film. So 2001 A Space Odyssey, made by Stanley Kubrick, and one of the undertones in that film, and it's a film that's very visual storytelling, it's very open for interpretation, has been studied endlessly by thought pieces, and but one of the things that Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke, who wrote it with him, had said is like, this is probably the first religious science fiction film. And one of the elements of 2001 is that when beings encounter the monolith, the continual recurring monolith, then they encounter the monolith and then they make a huge leap forward in their evolutionary process. And so like in the early stages when like the Neanderthals and the ape men encountered it, then the scene after that they begin to develop tools. Well, then it jumps, and where it jumps is to the future and space exploration and everything. And so there's always been in science fiction, I think, this underpinning that it's like that's where we're heading. And it's actually been a pretty recent development, I think, recent as in the last like 20 to 30 years, that the dystopian nature of going out into space and finding horror is that there's always been the prospect that we would go out into space and find adventure, or that there would be complexities to it and stuff like that. But there's always been like an eagerness and excitement to it. And so I think there's still a large part of that just sort of carries with me, is almost like a sort of and I know this is a big statement, but almost like a divine pull that says like, yes, this universe is here. And when he flung the stars into the heavens, God said all of that was good as well. And I think it's exciting to think about the prospects of exploring that.
Oh, well, there you go. God says it's good. So.
That's right.
I feel like I am getting a new window into the Lackey, and I am totally enjoying it. This is enthralling.
That's awesome. That's
Reed,
awesome.
do you would you be open to some That Ain't Right?
Let's do it.
Let's do this. So you had told me you had a new jingle prepped for the segment of the of That Ain't Right. So I want you to, if you will, kind of do this new jingle to introduce the bit of yeah, you were like, remember on the phone, you were like, that ain't right. That ain't right. That ain't right. That ain't right. Remember? And you were like, let's do that.
I mean, sure. I mean, I'll give it the try.
Try it. I just gave you the melody.
That ain't right. 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 That sure as hell ain't right.
All right, so That Ain't Right, where we talk about the top That Ain't Right moments from the film we're discussing. In this case, Beckley's What Scares Us Event Horizon. So each of us have chosen one. Actually, each of us have chosen three in case the other picks one of them. But I want to start with our guest, Steve Beckley. What tops your list, Stephen, when you think Event Horizon and things that would be qualified or kind of labeled That Ain't Right? What tops the heap for you?
Well, Reed, you mentioned the trivia behind the movie, like they had to cut so much stuff. Mm-hmm. And there's always a part in the movie that there must have been a lot cut out right out here, because there was the subliminal, hellish nightmare torture stuff towards the end of the movie, around the time when Sam Neill's character Weir comes back on the ship, and he's all like cut up, and then they're next to the what they call it, the drive, the portal in the engine room,
the gravity drive,
and there's the little pond of fire next to it, and he's like holding Lawrence Fishburne Miller by the head, and he's showing him his nightmares, and then it real flashes of subliminal torture stuff. That ain't right.
That ain't.
And
that ain't right. That ain't right.
I'm really I'm not proud of it, but sometimes I go back and look at that in slow motion.
Well, yeah, the freeze frame. Well, because it's just like, it's fascinating because I do the little pause.
That ain't right.
Well, I do the little pause and the step thing because I'm like, what did I just see?
I did that back on VHS back 20 years ago.
That's right.
I'm doing it on the Blu-ray now.
No, that ain't right.
No, it ain't right, but it's so right.
Streaming, so.
Confession time.
Dude, I'm right there with you, man. Like,
it's much easier to do Blu-ray than it was streaming. So
yeah.
No, it's true.
That's grisly. Okay, I'm not gonna fight that one. Reed, what would have been your top that isn't that?
Okay, so I have one that was on my list of possibles, but this is my number one.
Okay.
Man, friggin' Dr. Weir shredded his own face with his fingers and gouged out his own eyes, and then just sits there like just like he's just this casual little, oh, how are you doing today?
Don't mind
and
me.
Talks about, and the way his face looks, and this is so Steve had mentioned the vision of him when the ship like brings him back, and his whole like sort of grid sliced face. But this one is the one that's just raw, and like the skin is like shredded. And again, like when he opens his eyes there, which most of the shot I'm specifically referring to is the shot where his eyes are actually closed, but you can tell it's like rough hewn with like his own fingers have shredded his face. That ain't right, man.
So when
like
he's sitting in the captain's chair.
Yeah.
Yes, when he's sitting in the captain's chair. Yeah, and he's talking about where the event horizon went and everything, and I'm like, good Lord, that ain't right. That ain't right.
He's sitting there, it's all dark, and then the outside space lightning goes off, and
it just like shrouds him in all this like oh yes, oh my God, it's really, really nightmarish. That's one of the few moments in this that have stayed with me regardless of my proximity of seeing the film. That image is like indelible in my head, of just like that picture of the makeup on Sam Neill as he's sitting in that captain's chair. It's grisly.
You feel like if you were the captain, well, I guess this is of the Lewis and Clark, not of the Event Horizon, but I would be mad if I was the captain of the Lewis and Clark, because that chair sucks. That is like,
I mean, it does suck.
It does. It's like you're the captain and you got the slowest chair on the bridge. It's just like, wait.
Give me a minute.
It's like Thor in Ragnarok turning in the cell, the jail cell, just like that.
I'll be back around in a minute.
What a great movie. Let's see. So yes, my number one was the hell imagery. I'll say a kind of tie here. One I named Justin Meet Airlock, but the other one, so that I was ready for that one to be a strong contender, but other than the two y'all have named, the one that kind of sits right there is when Ware operates on Lucius Malfoy. That's terrible. And in fact,
vivisects him.
Yeah, that's a good word. You don't get to use that word often.
That reminded me of Midsommar. Remember that?
Yeah. Ooh, yeah. Oh, with the pins and the thing, like,
bear suit. Yeah, that's a good movie. You should watch the director's cut if you're going to watch it, though. But Reed, it's interesting because you talk about this is the second time I've seen this film. I saw it in the theater, as mentioned, and this time, so it's been a minute. And so I'm not speaking authoritatively here, but I couldn't discern the way the operation scene ends, the vivisection scene ends. I thought that the next scene he had sewn his eyes shut, but maybe that's
no, he didn't have any needle and thread. No, I mean like I'm not being jokey.
Scenes, I know, but at the end of the vivisection scenes, there's an imagery of like what looks like a threaded sort of thing that he's.
Maybe you're right. So I remember the image that you said, but I didn't put that together, but I think you're probably right that it's actually, but it's so hard to tell.
I know.
In the way his face
like Beckley,
looks,
I just pause and go real slow and.
That's right. This is the kind of film that makes you want to do that. It's like a train wreck. You cannot look away.
Like, wait a minute.
So when Jason Isaacs saw him, he didn't have his eyes, right?
Right. Well, he didn't have his eyes, and his eyes were popped open, so it was just the husks inside the sockets. And then after. And that's the thing, is that after that, yes, I think you're right, Nathan. He must have sewn his eyes together because his eyes are fixed down when Miller and the rest of the team see him. One more thing about you, since like you talk about DJs sort of being opened up. Back to the trivial bits, like apparently Jason Isaacs wanted that like prosthetic of himself. That ain't right. And the
that's
effects
what his wife said, right? She's like, don't bring that home.
Right. And then the effects team was so off put by the fact that he asked for it. They lied to him and said like, no, we still need it. They had no need for it. But like they were just so off put by the fact that he wanted that version of himself that was all like splayed open and everything. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. So those have been our top 3 that ain't right moments from Event Horizon, and that has been another installment of that ain't right, that ain't right, that ain't right, That ain't right.
That's what a creative jingle. It's so
Hey,
inventive.
It works for the it works for the bit.
It sure does. It sure does. So I'm still trying to figure out, and maybe this is our gateway drive into some deeper conversation.
Astronaut lackey.
I'm still trying to figure out what it is that's really, because there's another subgenre that this intersects with that fascinates me endlessly. I'm going to make a statement that may make listeners and
is it bold?
Fellow it's a little bold, but it's more confessional. That might make listeners and perhaps fellow co-hosts worry a bit for me. But so one of the things that I am actively as an adult trying to kind of understand what it does in my heart, mind, spirit, psyche. But there's a subgenre of films that are not possession films, but are actually films that deal with like gateways to hell, gateways to sort of a chaos dimension. Hellraiser does have an element of that. I mentioned Hellraiser earlier. Event Horizon, that's absolutely like Event Horizon. Presumably, it went to, as Dr. Weir said, a place of pure chaos, a place of pure evil. And there is something that is not only fascinating to me about that subgenre of horror storytelling, but that, dare I say, whenever I step back from it, I feel myself like more invigorated in like, what's so weird about it is I'm about to say this and I'm trying to figure out like, is this how I really feel? And I think it is. Like, these are the kind of things that like further sort of push me, not out of fear, but out of just like sort of a thoughtful construct, push me into more of my thoughts about my faith, my theological understanding, and about the nature of heaven and hell, and the nature of, sort of chaos and order and all of those kinds of things colliding together. And so films in the subgenre that typically deal with that, what you will most often find, as you do in this film, is, oh, we're intrepid explorers on an adventure, and now we've gone to this other gateway, and suddenly they come back muttering in Latin, the Latin phrase, liberate tutte me ex inferis, which is save yourself from hell. And there is something that is very, it's very bolstering to me to see maybe the futility, maybe the horror, maybe whatever it is, of people who become so fascinated and attracted to chaos. We're not having a conversation. Eventually on this show, maybe not this year, maybe next year, maybe whenever, I don't know. But eventually on the show, we are going to cover Clive Barker's Hellraiser. I keep coming back to it. This is a conversation about Event Horizon. Forgive me, listeners. Forgive me, co-hosts. But these elements, and because Event Horizon is the same thing. It's present in Dr. Weir, where Dr. Weir is drawn to this place of chaos. It starts off just figuring out what happened to my gravity drive. But then it becomes, no, I want to be a part of this thing, where this thing has gone. And Hellraiser has a comparable element to it. And well, I guess what my question would be, and then I'll continue sort of unpacking it. My question would be is, what is so attractive to certain people about chaos? And I'm not trying to ask it sort of reductively, but like, what is the attractive element of chaos? And I have a couple of maybe theories, but this is not, the first time. This film is not the only time that explores this idea of somebody becoming addicted to chaos, to where it infects them and becomes like an infestation in their life. And what originally is seen by any sane human being as horrific and brutal and something not to be even remotely entertained, becomes, to characters in the piece, they lose themselves, and then they become drawn fully into it, and they just sort of begin to embrace hell. And one of the things for me that I find so fascinating about it, and one of the reasons why I think it kind of solidifies more of what I feel in my own thoughts of faith and in my own relationship with God and Christ, is it's this notion of like there's something in my mind that witnesses people go down these seemingly irreversible paths. Like they just continue to propel themselves down a destructive train of thought in such a way that they turn back and feel like they are almost they're the enlightened ones, or they're the ones who are really in the know about everything, when they're sort of drawing all of these chaotic things into the world. I'm talking about like not only just the nature of addiction, like actual drug addiction, but also like addicted to certain meta narratives, be they rooted in complete falsehood or not, rooted in certain personal conspiracy theories, like those people are out to get me, you know, not even in the political or social structures, but just like that you're against me, and you get sucked in to this mindset, get trapped in this mindset. And I find it very energizing to remind myself that that is a possible thing to get sucked into, and that only for the grace of God and the work of Christ would I not get, you know, would I not be possibly prone to get sucked into a similar thing. And I don't know if I'm making any sense, but I'm thinking about the ways that Dr. Weir was just sort of so sucked into, you know, Miller said, "We've got to get you home." And he said, "I am home. Like this is my home." And again, before I sort of wind it down and shut up and let people respond, I think about the times where people are like, I really know what's going on. Like, again, I'm not just talking about social or political broad spectrums, but just like that person at work that you're convinced is out to get you, or that person in your family that you're convinced is out to sabotage, or sometimes it's your own interpersonal, like close, intimate relationships. Why are you constantly undermining me? Why are you constantly like sabotaging me? And they get sort of drawn to embracing that chaotic element. And I think they lose sight of thinking clearly and of thinking wholly. Not wholly HOLY, but WHOLLY. And I don't know, it pings a lot of things that I'm still kind of trying to explore in my own mind. But I always walk away from stories like this feeling like, yes, okay, there's an addictive chaos out there. And if we don't stay sober and don't stay vigilant in our own way, that is something that can get its, you know, in this film, literal hooks in you. But you can head down that path where you suddenly like like an agent of chaos. Am I making any sense, or is it just like, no, Reed, go see it?
If that's an analogy you're taking from the film, I mean, the film has the character Weir. I mean, they show in the very beginning of the movie, not the very beginning, but when they get out of their sleep and they're having their debriefing meeting, he's like the smartest person in the room. Everybody else needs him to slow down. You're like, speak English, man.
Right.
So he's able to get misled or have this chaotic thinking, even though he's supposedly the smartest guy.
Yeah.
So it's not like anybody is immune to that.
Right. And that's the illusion, or that's the conceit would be to think like, well, I'm too smart for that. And we see that play out. Like we see super intelligent people spouting off things that when you hear it from a clear mindset, you're just like, oh my God, that is crazy. But they've embraced it as like this really, like as if they're the enlightened ones, you know? Anyway, that's what I'm scratching at. Yeah, Nathan, it feels like something's stirring. No?
Yeah.
So you're just like, you're embrace
no,
oblivion.
You've you know, kind of threw a boulder in the pond. So I'm trying to wrap my arms around it.
Me? No.
But it's all there. So, you know, you're not misapplying what's in the film. And it's interesting because and I'm trying to reframe what you've sort of put out there so that I can sort of, you know, in small bites, maybe engage it. But effectively, you're kind of saying like, what attracts us to this, or what do we do if we're attracted, or is there even a question embedded? We rephrase if there was.
Yeah. So what does attract us to chaos? Like when we start going down that path, what does attract us there? What do we find so compelling about it?
But I think, okay, well, see, that's, you know, one, in the spirit of chaos, here's a little Scarlet Witch, but see, I wonder, because what you're asking is kind of like intersecting with some of the thoughts I was having too, though there's a little bit of different verbiage. of the same, they're undulating from the same gateway. Because think about, man, I'm really trying to put this into morsels. I'm going to backtrack to the story of the film, or the meta story of the film, meaning there's a 2-hour plus cut.
Yeah.
Because what's interesting is I was kind of pondering, okay, what's happening in this movie for the sake of our conversation? Like, what's going on here? One of the things that I would have critiqued it for before I knew there was a much longer sort of conceived cut is I feel like they fast track Weir's arc. He is, I don't feel enough empathy for him at the front to feel sympathy for what he's kind of engaging in the end. And the
right.
You know, the movie kind of doesn't care if you feel sympathy for him. I understand that, but just like, I think that would have been a more interesting arc, and they sort of just shunt right through it. And because if you think of the character of Weir, I think Beckley, you alluded to this, when they come out of stasis, he's the expert. He's the one who designed this ship. He's the one who has the insight. He does have the craving to kind of comprehend what has transpired in it. He, you know, it's supposedly gone missing, but he knows that's not really the case. I think it's safe to assume in the text of the film, he's unaware of kind of its travels, you know.
Right.
And so we don't know is what sort of moment in time locks him in to the you know, gravity pull of this hellish sort of entity and journey. The point I'm simply trying to make is, in the context of the film, Weir is most poised to comprehend and maybe even ultimately pursue power, status, control.
Mm-hmm.
And so all I'm sort of nuancing of what you're saying, Reed, is the word chaos. Like, I think it manifests in the film as chaos, but how I wrote this, I'll shut up with sort of speculative jargon and sort of share how I wrote this, and maybe we marry these somehow. Is, to me, part of this is cautionary tale of pursuing innovation at all costs. And what I would have been curious is framing it, and maybe this is, again, retouching on or brushing up against how you're sort of thinking about this. For the three of us as people of faith who in a general sense may have been acculturated to the notion, maybe rightly so, that unfettered pursuit of gain is unhealthy, what and is there a balance between innovation, pursuit, ambition, and being corrupted by that pursuit? What are the checks and balances? Because in this film, the literal manifestation of the pursuit of power is a chaotic, hellish unleashing.
Mm-hmm.
But you could tell the same story with different manifestations. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I guess I'm just trying to brush up against or invoke to, and maybe Reed, please feel free to rebut if you're like, Nathan, that's not at all what I was after. But it feels like this, because I think we're all drawn not so much to chaos, though maybe, but then what does chaos represent? Chaos represents a dismembering of order, an unfettered engagement with, you know, hedonism sounds sexual. I don't even totally mean it sexual, but just an anything goes sort of mentality. And it's funny because I'm trying, there's a lot, this is a big idea that's thrown out there, and the word that's coming to me is freedom. But what's interesting is literally just the other day, I had a lot of thoughts pressing in on me of just like people I encounter and sort of the political kind of mindsets that I would sort of maybe say, oh, well, that's not how I like to view the world, and so on and so forth. And y'all, this weird kind of sensation overtook me. And it was, be free. And I think there's this weird, all I'm trying to do in setting that out there is it's these opposites. There's pursuit of power, and then there's be free. Because me in that moment being sort of pressed in mentally by these, how I would have in the moment described them, these political thoughts and ideas, and oh, so-and-so thinks this, and I don't agree with that, and blah, 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 and so forth, was me trying to wrestle control and be quote unquote on top. Like, well, I'm right. And so, you know, if they want to talk about such and such, well, I'm going to be ready with X, Y, and Z, versus, hey, be free of this. Like walk free. And are these the counterpoints, and how do we engage those things? Part of me feels like I've made a mess of what you're after, Reed, but
no, well, and it's not as if what I had was terribly clean in and of itself, because like
it's chaotic.
It was chaotic.
Chaos is freedom.
Well, that's the thing, is that that's the thing is like, I think that that's the lie that people get really drawn to, is that freedom means an abandon of rules, or that it means an abandon of sort of structure. And when people talk about like freedom, a lot of times they mean like, you know, do not restrict me, do not afflict me, all of these kinds of things. And in certain contexts, yes, that is what freedom means. But I remember there was that really interesting thing that I think I may have brought up on the show before, where they talked about the study they had done with children in children's playground areas, where when they had a fence around, say, an acre of playground, children would, with confidence, walk right up to the fence, and they would walk right up to the edge of where they could be. When they had a playground where they removed the fence, the children tended to stay huddled closer in the center and would not venture out, because they did not have a boundary. G.K. Chesterton had expressed it differently, where he had said, you know, on a clear sunny day, you can walk right up to the edge of the cliff. But if it's foggy and shrouded, you are going to stay as far away from the drop-offs as possible. And I think what sometimes can happen is we get sucked in, and Weir is being sort of hooked in. I think you're right, Nathan, that it's hard to discern exactly when he pivots in the film, because from the, you know, opening moments with what we learn about him with, like, you know, his wife and everything like that, like, it's drawing him. It's saying, stay here with me, you know, in the form of his wife saying, you know, stay here with me
forever.
And I think that's the, yes. Yeah. I think that is the I'm going to say this and hope that it makes sense, that like we get drawn to the illusion of freedom in a version that says, you know, there is no structure and there is no, you know, and maybe that answers my own question. Like, why is chaos so attractive? Is when we think that's what freedom is. So if we think that chaos and freedom are synonyms, then we're going to find chaos very, very attractive. Like, no, this is free, is because this is just anarchy and chaos. When in point of fact, you know, one of the things that is so sort of counterintuitive is that when you are sort of operating within a healthy and wholesome structure, then that is really profound freedom, because then you can, like, for instance, we talked earlier about, like, Nathan just dropped on, like, you know, would you go to space? And I'm like, heck yeah, I'd go to space. But if you're going to navigate space, you need to understand the laws of space travel. You need to understand the law, you know, like, you need to understand the rules that are in there so that you can, within reasonable structures, defy them or bend them to a degree to where, and you know, a savvy listener might say, well, Reed, that's all they do in the Event Horizon, is they just bend the laws of space-time and just fold time in on itself. But I think what happens to us from time to time is that, you know, it's the old adage that curiosity killed the cat, but I think sometimes we get addicted. Maybe I should just leave it there. We get addicted to a freedom that is really chaos posing as freedom, and we get addicted to that, and then that's what we want. And it manifests itself in our own lives this way, in that we'll say, like, I don't need anybody telling me what to do. I don't need anybody telling me how to run my life. I need to just be, I need to just be free. And then they just go on and live in a sort of a reckless selfishness with no understanding of their tethers to the community, with no other understanding of their tethers to their own family, with no understanding of exactly the, again, boundaries or structures that might produce wholesome and goodness. But instead they would just say like, no, this is about me. And that freedom that, again, can be so attractive is really just introducing tremendous chaos till suddenly it's the tragic cautionary tale of the prodigal son who's like, give me my inheritance now, let me go. And then he just wastes it. And he just goes and just squanders it all. And so then when he's out there, literally all that's left of him with his freedom is feeding slop to pigs. In the parable, he's like, man, if I could be back in my father's house where there was structure, there was loving care, there was all of this kind of thing. And what I'm not saying is, oh, well, we just need to go back to the good old days. Anybody who hears that is either I'm doing a piss poor job or maybe they're not quite listening. I'm not saying we just need to go back to the good old days, but I am saying that we should be leery of the type of freedom that says, okay, abandon structure, abandon boundaries, abandon guidance, because more often than not, that is a chaos posing as freedom, and the ends there. I mean, the scriptures tell us that the road to destruction is broad, and part of what I think the scriptures are trying to articulate for us there is that it's like, yeah, if you just, damn the torpedoes and just, who cares about any of these sort of structure, that's a very, very destructive. I mean, in the name, it's destructive. It's the tearing down of structure, and you think that's going to free you when in point of fact that may leave you sort of vulnerable to any degree of chaos and sort of decimation in your own life. Is that, I don't know, y'all. I don't know. Event Horizon, man, I'm stuck
Just
on the
take
ship.
him to space already. Beckley, what are some of your thoughts? And
that almost made me think of where I mentioned the place I saw Event Horizon originally at the dorm in college. I see so many freshmen come in and experience chaos in their freshman year of college, and they don't have enough structure. They have freedom for the first time in their life. And,
yeah, and they can kind of crash and burn if they're not, like sort of well grounded, if it will.
They need to find whatever exists at the university, or they sink and find another way of life outside of that, or but if they experience too much chaos all at once, that can be destructive. So it's another amalgamism. I don't know what the word is, but
I like it.
When I was watching the movie, I was wondering, well, if you're watching this, should you, or do you think that that Sam Neill's character Weir is a sympathetic villain in any way? I mean, at the beginning of the movie, here, the very first scene with him, he's waking up from a nightmare, and that's even before they get to the Event Horizon.
What's really interesting, you ask it that way, because it, again, syncs up with what I was articulating about how I view or don't view him. But I know y'all caught this, but the late in the film, when I think the not Sam Neill characters are trying to flee finally, and that green sort of big chamber thing bursts and the blood's flowing. Yes. I was like, oh, this is The Shining. Well, I actually saw a note today about them pitching it as The Shining in space.
Yeah. Right.
So to your point, Steve, it's like, well, is Jack Torrance a sympathetic character? I guess it just depends on, I think at the front end of the movie with Sam Neill, at least, I think we don't know enough about him to really feel sympathy. And then by the time you might, he's already plugged in to this. Yeah.
I mean, how many characters, how many crew people are there? 7 or 8 of them, and we only get those haunting visions or backstory of 3 of them.
Really.
Lawrence Fishburne, Sam Neill, and Peters, Kathleen Quinlan's character.
Right.
And hers is kind of like, have you ever seen the movie Don't Look Now?
Yes, I have. I don't think
it kind of
Nathan's
reminds
seen
me
it.
of that, where she sees her child. I don't know if her child is supposed to have died or still be alive. I guess when she talks about him, he's still alive, but apparently he has a sickness.
Yeah,
they aren't
That's
super
part of
clear
what
on
haunts her, is maybe she's haunted, and we don't see enough of it to really know for sure, but maybe she's haunted about feeling responsible for that, or not being there enough. That's similar to what Weir's feeling, like he wasn't there enough for his wife, and then she committed suicide.
I'm going to say no. Weir is not a sympathetic character at the front end from Go because of this technical note I made, which is, why on earth would you design your engineering chamber with spikes, massive spikes throughout it? I'm like, come on. Hell was already working on you, bro, and you designed it.
Yeah, you remember when the character Cooper
Yeah.
to rescue Justin, and he's like, oh, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
That's right.
He's just
No,
floating
it's
back
true.
towards the spikes on the walls.
No,
Yeah.
it's true.
Yeah. I was like, there's no, but come on. You don't design a torture chamber and call it a space engineering deck or whatever. If you
That almost makes me think like he knew it was going to be a gateway to hell to begin with.
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
yeah.
You're making my point. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well,
I
and
know,
that's
y'all are making decent points here from the standpoint of, like, I joked about the 90-minute runtime, but I'm curious. I'm interested to see. I don't need more grisly, hellish imagery, but in terms of just a more methodical, kind of fleshed out breathing room for some of these arcs to develop a little more strongly. That I think that would have been more interesting.
I could see the potential for a couple more of those characters to have backstory or development.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been a lot of I mean, I know we joked about it, but I have not actually read the screenplay of it or whatever, but like there is I think some pretty well documented, like, this is what did not make the cut, and there's quite a bit of character stuff. I think even some substantiation for why Justin enters the airlock to begin with. There's and I can't remember offhand what it was. I didn't write it down. But yeah, it's like he doesn't, there were other things that could have sort of rooted and grounded this. There's one more thing that I just want to mention as just sort of getting back to the whole attraction of chaos thing, and it harkens back to, I think, our Lake Mungo conversation, Nathan, but just making an additional observation of chaos can probably seem really attractive when the world doesn't make sense, because then you think chaos is how it is. And if the world doesn't make sense and there's no sort of understanding of you can't give context to the suffering or to the burden that you carry, then chaos can probably seem really appealing. And I don't say this reductively. It's just it could be well, no, because the world doesn't make sense. So stop trying to pretend it does, and just, move forward into what that is. And even with Dr. Weir, we've seen in his backstory to Stephen's question that his wife took her own life, and there's a tremendous amount of tragedy in that might garner sympathy. And maybe you do, in something like that, you just say the world doesn't make sense, and I'm going to stop pretending it does. Instead, I'm going to plug in to this place of pure chaos. It's one of the reasons why in The Dark Knight, Heath Ledger's Joker is so convincing, is because some of the things that he talks about the way things work are sort of rooted in experiences that we can kind of relate to and make us pause and go oh, wow. And again, I keep going back to, the one of the premises of The Exorcist, and in the sort of tactic of the devil in that movie, is to make us despair and see ourselves as animal and ugly, and reject the possibility that God could love us, the prospect that God could love us. And I think sometimes when we get spiraled in our thinking, either from trauma or from disillusionment, disappointment, a deferred hope, an ongoing struggle that just will not relent, we can get sort of locked in to thinking okay, I'm going to reject the possibility of a loving God who is actively attending to my watch care and of a loving community of his people expressing faithfulness therein, I'm going to reject all of that. And instead, what seems more right and what seems to fit my station right now seems to be more this destructive, chaotic, sort of anarchistic kind of, well, then just blow it up. If I can't get to the top floor, then I'm just going to blow the building up. And that can kind of, and I'm not saying that in a glib sort of dismissive way. I'm just saying like I can see how if you're not sort of surrounded by people who love you and are going to sort of push against those notions and push against those inclinations, bring you home as Miller is trying to do, then you will not only find that attractive, but might even delude yourself into thinking that that's right and that's the way it's supposed to be. And if you sort of get lost to that, what is Weir saying to Miller at the end? Do you see? Like he keeps talking to him about like, this is the way it is. Can't you see it? And I think it's intentional that Miller, right before he's like, yes, I see, and destroys the bridge so that Cooper and Stark can actually get away. And Justin, I think he's still alive at that point. So anyway, these are just some of the things. I'm not even convinced I successfully wrangled them all down, but these are some of the things that this film ping for me in this conversation and this concept about chaos and all those kind of things. So yeah,
it feels like inherent to that notion, because this idea of chaos keeps coming up. It feels like inherent to that notion, and this is just where my kind of heart is going, is that you aren't saying this, Reed, but inherent to a conversation about chaos or unstructuredness, destruction, that it's then the natural opposite is structure, rules, boundaries. And on a certain level, there's some great truth to that. But at the same time, so peek into my sort of psyche and part confession, more psychological than emotional perhaps, but sometime recently my wife and I were talking and I was coming to sort of some self-awareness, and I'm abandoning a lot of nuance just to get to the point. And I said, I think I'm kind of worried that I have not engaged things in life. How would I phrase it? So without knowing the rules of a thing, I will often not venture into that thing. And what I was trying to articulate to her is there are times I won't attempt a new skill, set out on a new adventure, because in my brain, I don't know all the perils, pitfalls, and rules associated with that thing. So instead, I just don't. And I worry, in truth, in confession, that there have been aspects and parts of life that I've not enjoyed's the wrong word, but just embarked upon because of some sort of fog or fear attached to the plagues and pitfalls that might come but might not. And so what I'm trying to position here is, I don't know, and you're not saying this, Reed, but in this continuing drumbeat of chaos, I don't know that the answer then is, okay, well, we're rule followers too. And so, because I would say there's a real, I'm going to use these labels, but fundamentalism is in effect a propping up and I might say in my more cynical moments, a worshiping of rules and structures and the boundaries. We name the boundaries and name a ton of them, and following the boundaries is what constitutes faith. So there's that side of the spectrum. The opposite end of that spectrum is just utter hedonism and flagrant, sort of chaos, to use that word. But what keeps coming to me is, I think I shared sometime this year about the Rohr quote of, do things because they are true and not for fear of punishment or promise of reward. And it's like, there's gotta be, to me, it's not worth it if there's not some middle that says it's not either of these things.
Well, I don't.
what
I
mean?
wouldn't.
That's just me sort of.
No, I do. I know.
Freestyling.
I know exactly what you mean. I feel a little bad that after, feeling what I feel, what it feels in my mind has been, me dominating this conversation to respond automatically rather than giving like Steve a chance to respond. But this is like, this is like burning in me. So like, you just identified it. What I would say is it's not middle ground. It's those things that posit themselves as like we think that structure equals rules, and maybe in a certain sense that's true, but nobody's offended by the law of gravity. The law of gravity is a rule. Nobody's offended by it, and it does no one any harm. It is a structure by which the world operates. And I think there's a vast difference between that is something that God has positioned and something that people would then coerce and say, well, this is what God says. And this is how, this is the structure that, because you're describing things like rule following and subservience and things like that. And I think in a lot of ways, look at how many religious leaders got offended at Jesus for what? Breaking the rules.
Right.
And clearly
Sure.
Jesus was not breaking the rules. Instead, Jesus was operating within what I would say Jesus is not a agent of chaos either, which is sometimes people, kind of presume that a Christ figure is an agent of chaos. I reject that. I say that Christ was showing and embodying what the real structure was supposed to be and how it was supposed to function and operate. And in that end, that's not something that I would say requires middle ground. I would say it requires following. And that's not, and yes, by all means, there are people who posit themselves as the voice of God, the face of God, posit themselves as owning or controlling the structure of God. And I'm like, no, you're not. But again, I get back to the gravity thing, and I get back to like, no, it's like the world holds together because there is structure to it. And God looked at that and said that was good. It is the distortion when we try to position ourselves as, and maybe I'm resisting calling it middle ground because I don't want to compromise with what you're describing. I don't want to compromise with somebody that's just interested in power and control. I want to live in the fullness and wholeness of who God made me to be and recognize that is structure.
Ground, I think a better phrase for middle ground is just third way. It's not chaos. It's not rule following. I don't.
Yes. Yeah.
It's something else. Steve, what are some thoughts you're having over there, buddy?
Wow. Wow. Yeah, in the film, it's about. I think the deeper thing is about mankind. In the space sci-fi thing they're trying to get across. Mankind in the film, literally, but in real life, figuratively, we're too preoccupied trying to figure out if we can, quote unquote, fold space-time or to travel astronomically far distances that we don't stop to realize that maybe it will have consequences. The character Smith in the movie, the pilot, he says, you break all the laws of physics and you seriously think there won't be a price? All of us in our chosen professions, if they are incorporating many levels of management and systems or decades of standards and practices, parts mass produced by large corporations and then sold to small businesses or larger businesses, yada, yada, yada. We're all cogs in a larger machine with our own personal agendas, but serving the larger, unstoppable juggernaut of human endeavor, theoretically aimed at utopia, but more likely destined to medium disasters and larger destructions. The character of Weir is an example of how one person's psychological break or can suddenly press down on the gas pedal of the destructiveness of human endeavor and its clash with hell.
Yeah, right.
In conclusion, and inspired by Nathan's conclusion on RoboCop episode, should we defund the police? I ask you, should we defund the Space Force?
Are they even funded yet? I don't know.
Who knows, man? Who knows?
Oh,
yeah, man.
That's funny. As a random note there, I was listening to a podcast recently where she was interviewing the head of Space Force, like not as a joke.
Oh, for real?
And yeah, and sweet guy. What's really funny is my asking you guys about going to space was partly inspired by that conversation.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Funny you walked into this, Beckley. Yeah. She asked him that. She's like, would you go to space? And he's like, no. I'm like, wow, you are. But he's like this like high ranking, just long serving bureaucrat military guy. But he gets real defensive because I don't know if y'all know this, the Space Force members are called Guardians. Well, they got made fun of for cribbing Guardians of the Galaxy, and he gets real defensive in the podcast. He's like, no, this name's been around since like 1987 for the Space Force. This is a thing. Anyway, it was really funny.
So
should we defund Space Force? That's a wonderful question. If the goal of Space Force is to bring back hell ships, sure, why not?
Yeah, I'm all for reallocating resource to not to not. Well, and here's one thing that I will say. Okay, so, and this will be my final contribution to the whole thing. So I was recently listening to something, I forget what show it was, but I was recently listening to something where they expressed something that I found quite beautiful, and I would posit this as the solution or the answer to all of this. And I would actually pivot it off of, last week, Nathan, you somewhat jokingly, do you defund the police? Steve, now, do you defund the Space Force? And it was this show I was listening to was actively tackling that and saying, like, defund's the wrong word. The word we need is reimagine. And thinking about like reimagining what that is supposed to look like, what its aim is supposed to look like, what its intention is supposed to be, how it is supposed to operate, and reimagining that. And what I love and find so appealing about that is that reimagining it by its own word is not, abandoned structure. It is acknowledging, maybe this structure is not the only structure that there can be. And maybe this structure is not the only way that this thing can be expressed, which, again, you look at the person of Christ and, what is the story of Lazarus, of not saying, hey, death does not have to be the end of the story. And Christ himself coming out of the grave, that's the way you've always seen it. We're born, we live, we die. And now I'm going to show you something new. And behold, I make all things new, he said. And so then this notion of reimagining things becomes really invigorating, and that the solution might not be option A, which says, no, the structure exists, kneel before Zod, this is the structure, this is what you have to do. Option B might be, no, that structure's not working for me, so abandon structure, abandon all of this other things, and embrace chaos, because that's clearly how the world works. And maybe this, to unite all these sort of threads of conversation, maybe the answer is, no, reimagine and recapture what has perhaps been lost in what prompted in the scriptures God to say, let there be, in the first place, which is that impulse, that spark to create, and which involves operating within structure, and involves pushing upon that structure to look at something new, or to maybe fashion something new from within it. Artists don't invent new things by abandoning the structure of music or abandoning the structure of how clay can be sculpted. They produce new things by understanding the structure and then using that structure to propel it forward by reimagining something. And that is something that I find tremendously inspiring and appealing. And, it's not the event horizon, like, oh, we're just going to, but a new vision, a new, like, sort of reimagining things, not just, oh, well, we're going to head back to the old ways, or we're going to, move forward into chaos, but rather reimagine it as something new. And I find that quite lovely. And I find that,
and ultimately to just boldly go where no one has gone before.
Oh my gosh, this moment is making me so happy.
I was thinking it was the Lawrence Fishburne character Miller, who was the one that was well, he was the commanding officer, and he was, if you pay attention, he was very, very task oriented, and he was very like, what's the next thing we got to do? Let's move on to that. Let's get this done so we can all go home. And he was kind of like the opposite of Weir and Chaos.
Yeah. No, exactly. Nope, that's exactly right. This is a fascinating movie. Yeah, no, this is a fascinating movie. Let's bring this home. This is a fascinating movie. So, y'all ready for the fog meter? I'll bring us into it. Y'all ready for this? So, the fog meter is our very specific metric of fear and God, wherein we rate these films on their scares and their substance. So, I'm going to go first, and then I will pivot it over to Steve and round it home with Nathan. So, on fear, this is a terrifying movie, y'all. Like, it is scary. Seeing it for the first time, perhaps not being prepared for it, it can be very disarming and very alarming. And I think the fear factor is even high on repeat viewings for some of its graphic extremity. I'm going to give this a 10 for the fear factor.
Wow.
What say you, Steve?
I wasn't going to go that high, and I'm the one that brought it up. So maybe I give it an 8. So that's still pretty high.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I think a lot of these the imagery is pretty harrowing. It's dark and it's in space, and it's a haunted house in space. That's what the filmmakers really were trying to get to: The Shining in space, and with the puzzle box from Hellraiser as the engine to the ship.
Yeah. So, yep. That's exactly right. Exactly right. But oh yeah, go.
I think with repeat viewings, though, maybe that takes a little of the edge off. So I think that's why I just give it an 8.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. What say you, Nathan?
I'm gonna join our guest at an 8. So I think in most levels it succeeds in spades at being a horror movie. One of the things that again, maybe I've seen it before. I don't think there's a lot of like dread building in it. It's just very, it's very direct in what it does, and what it does is try to just kind of like gross you out in places. But I mean, it's got a good story to it. I just don't find the watching of it scary, just more bleh, if that makes sense.
Vomitous. What would you say for its God factor, its substance?
I think there's a world where maybe the extended cut, the longer version, might have more stuff there, but I think this cut, it's just leaning straight for the spaceship went to hell and brought back Sam Neill, Dr. Alan Grant as the demon, and so from that standpoint, I'm not sure that it knows exactly what else it wants to do with that. So I'm going to land it, I think, a 6 on the God factor.
What say you, Steve?
I also have a 6 for the God factor.
Hey, look at that, y'all in on it.
It's above the midway point. I think it's driving at some themes there, but the characters aren't developed enough, or they're edited off too much, and I think it could have gotten there further up the scale, but it's not quite there.
Yeah, no, I'm only slightly higher than y'all, and I agree with what you said. I was going to land at a 7 for it, and I think the biggest reason is because I think there's some really fascinating ideas. I will probably always, be a bit sad that there won't be this, sort of ultimate director's vision, and who knows, maybe they'll find some footage that they can clean up and use it. I mean, the possibilities seem to be endless, but yeah, so I'm going to land at a 7 because I think its ideas are not fully formed in the version that we get, though it does have some interesting things bubbling under its surface. So that puts me at 7, which means that we collectively give Event Horizon, directed by Paul W.S. Anderson, director of the original Mortal Kombat, didn't mention that earlier, we give it a 7.5 out of 10 on the fog meter, which is a perfectly respectable showing.
Did you see that he turned down directing X-Men to direct this?
Yeah, turned down directing X-Men and X-Files.
Yeah.
And the sequel to Mortal Kombat, right?
Whiff and whiff.
Yes, absolutely. But a trickier question for me to answer, maybe not so difficult for y'all. I'll start with you, Steve. Do you recommend Event Horizon?
I do. I recommend it to anybody who likes space horror. Absolutely. And,
sure.
Anyone who likes even haunted house movies, because it's haunted house in space. So yeah, definitely if you're a fan of Alien or Interstellar, or and then that's not really horror, but I think it definitely had an influence on.
Steve on the show said this was like Interstellar. Sweet mother and father, or daughter and father story across time.
Well, you know that when Sam Neill shows that he folds the magazine page and puts the pen.
Yeah, they use it in that effectively.
That's ripped off in Interstellar.
It sure is.
But yeah, if you like Jason X.
I will concur with that.
Great mashup.
I think something about this movie is you might watch it and criticize it and think it's just a ripoff of all these other lists of sci-fi movies.
I did my first viewing. Yeah.
If you don't mind that so much and you just think it's more of an homage to all those movies or putting it all together into something new, then maybe you'll love it. So
awesome.
I do recommend it.
Cool. Nathan, what about you?
To horror people, absolutely. I mean, I
Sure.
think it'd be pretty off-putting if you're not, into the genre.
Absolutely.
So from that standpoint, not in a wide capacity, but yeah, I mean, watching it, it's like, yes, this is kind of very squarely in our wheelhouse.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that end, with the only asterisk, but very serious asterisk, that if you are squeamish about violence, that is a problem trying to sit through this movie, because this movie is tremendously violent. With that asterisk aside, yes, I also highly recommend it. And I find it very captivating. This definitely won't be the last time I see it. I'm drawn to it every so often, just for, because I think I'm interested in kind of what it's interested in. So yeah, that puts our conversation about Event Horizon on the record. Steve, thank you so much. Oh, look at that. He's got it. Thank you so much for recommending this film and for giving us the opportunity to talk about it and for participating in this conversation. It's been really a fun conversation for me. I really have enjoyed myself. Hope you have too.
You're welcome. It's been great.
Thank you.
Thank you
Yeah, as always, Nathan, thank you always as well. And next week, we are going to be going to a film that we want to go ahead and put it out there that this is a film that at the moment is a little difficult to come by. It is available on like the Cinemax sort of streaming platform. So like I think there's also a Cinemax free trial like Prime sub channel that you can watch it. There might be a version out there that's on one of the free services that's like Tubi or something like that, but I couldn't find one. But what we're going next week is another What Scares Us submission. And this one is the 1986 classic starring Rutger Hauer and C. Thomas Howell. The Hitcher is going to be happening next week. Now, a couple of things on that. First of all, again, a little hard to find. So do a little bit of research, try to find it for next week. Also, if you just can't locate it, this is one of those rare moments where like the remake that was made in 2007 is a little bit more accessible and has a similar enough story. They're not the same movie, but the remake stays sort of close enough to what happened that if you were only able to watch the remake, again, you wouldn't know specifically what we were talking about, but you'd probably get the gist of the conversation. And then also we are going to be going to episodes 5 and 6 of The Witcher. So next week is The Witcher and The Hitcher. You get you?
What you witching, what you hitching?
What you hitching? What you hitching?
What you reading?
Oh boy. So yes, we'll see you next week for all of that. As we say on every episode, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but not the end of the conversation. And in that spirit, we encourage you to fear nothing else and be on your way rejoicing. We'll see you next week, everybody.
Thank you, Steve. See you guys.
You're welcome.